Hello there, so Osu is a weird ass game if you think about it. Somehow a rhythm game whose content is made by the community and not by its developers has managed to survive for more than a decade. So how the hell did we make this work? What is stopping people from ranking garbage and unplayable maps? The way we've managed to regulate and dictate what makes a map rankable is with the ranking criteria and people who enforce it. The ranking criteria is a collection of rules and guidelines that dictate what is rankable and what isn't. Now the ranking criteria itself is pretty complicated since it has evolved for years and years, but luckily we're going to focus on the Taiko Ranking Criteria. The reason the Taiko Ranking Criteria isn't as complicated as Osu's is because Taiko's history as a separate game mode is actually a lot shorter compared to Osu Standard. Not only that, but Taiko as a game mode is just objectively a lot simpler than Osu. Now before we head into the Taiko ranking criteria, there are some terms that you should learn and be familiar with. Rules. Rules are exactly that. Rules. They cannot be broken under any circumstances, period. Now guidelines. Guidelines are basically rules, but they can be broken under specific circumstances or if you have a valid reason to do so. Now lowercase d. Lowercase d is basically the abbreviation for a dawn note or a red note. K is the abbreviation for a cat or a blue note. A capital D is abbreviation for a finisher dawn. A K, capital K, is an abbreviation for a finisher cat. Now overlap. Overlap is when a note partially covers or totally covers other notes. Rest moment. Now rest moment is a period of time without any notes that allow the player to rest. Continuous mapping. So this is a pretty tricky term and it's going to require a bit of explaining. In order to understand continuous mapping, we need to understand how to count periods of time. So we know about beats. One beat is 1 over 1 or 1 1. The number below is how the beats are divided, which in this case are beats, just one beat, 1. And the number up top represents how many units of the bottom number. Let's say we have a period of time that is shorter than a beat. Let's say it's a quarter of a beat shorter. It looks like this. Now, how would we write this? Since we're using a quarter snaps, we know for a fact that the number below would be 4. But how many quarter beats are there? If we count, we will find that there are only 3. So this would be 3, 4. Now we can take this principle for periods of time that are longer than a beat. Let's say we have a period of time that looks like this. Since we're dealing with the most basic unit of rhythm, a beat, we know for a fact that the number on the bottom will be 1. Now if we count how many beats are there, we will get 3. So this period of time will be written as 3 over 1 or 3 1. So what does continuous mapping mean? Continuous mapping is basically a period of time in which there are no breaks whatsoever. Difficulties such as Kantan, Futsu, Muzikashi, and Oni all require breaks after 16 over 1 or 20 over 1 of continuous mapping. 16-1 to 21 basically means a period of time that is around 16 to 20 beats long. So if there are no breaks after 16 to 20 beats, then you must place a break or else you are breaking a guideline. The length of this break depends on the difficulty. Remember, the easier the difficulty, the longer the breaks tend to be. BPM scaling. Now the last thing you guys should keep in mind is that the Taiko ranking criteria uses 180 BPM as a reference point, meaning that the rules and guidelines are written as if a song is 180 BPMs. So for example, if you have a song that is slower than 180 BPM, then the rules and guidelines can be a lot less strict. It all depends how different it is to 180 BPM. If your song is 90 BPM and the ranking criteria states that you can't have half notes in your difficulty, then in this case, it would be quarter notes instead of half notes because 90 BPM is half as slow as 180 BPM. I am massively oversimplifying here. This is something I highly recommend you sit down and read more about this yourself because this is a very tricky subject to grasp and sometimes I kind of get confused in my head to this day. But yeah, definitely sit down and read it. I'll have the wiki page on it down below in the description. General rules and guidelines. Now the rules are: each note must have its color clearly distinguishable from the previous and upcoming notes. This basically means that it should be possible to read the notes. For example, look at this map. This map might be absolutely confusing and hard to read for a newer player, but it's 100% possible for a more skilled player. Every note must be clearly assignable to a musical layer or layer unit. This is pretty self-explanatory. The omit first barline feature of an uninherited timing point must be used when a BPM change occurs that adds an unnecessary barline. This is a bit more complicated. Each bar is represented by a barline during gameplay, right? We know about this. Red lines basically dictate when those barlines occur. This is fine for songs that have a single BPM because barlines will appear when there are actual bars. However, if a song is variable BPM, meaning that it needs multiple red lines in order to time properly, then each one of those red lines are going to spawn a bar line during gameplay. And this is very problematic. The reason why is because it doesn't accurately reflect the song's timing. Let's look at an example. Here is a map with the correct bar lines, and here is the exact same map with the bar lines not omitted. It looks absolutely horrible. We can all agree on this. In order to hide these bar lines, you go to the timing panel, click on the red line that's causing you trouble, go to the style tab and check omit first bar line. This will make it so that the very first bar line produced by that red line is hidden during gameplay. Guidelines. Now there are quite a few guidelines, but I'm only going to talk about the most important ones in my opinion. I still recommend reading the full Taiko Ranking Criteria in order to know every guideline. Now, if slider velocity changes are in use, they should correspond to pacing changes in the song. This is pretty, self-explanatory. We already covered this in Emphasis Basics. Slider tick rate should be set according to the song. This basically means if a song is swing, meaning that it uses 1/3 or 1/6 snappings, then the slider tick rate should be set to 3 so that drum fills on sliders can actually match the timing of the song. If the song is not swing, then you just leave it at 1. Substantial overlapping should be avoided so that the color of each note is still easily readable and does not pose unnecessary visual disturbance. Pretty self-explanatory. And lastly, use low volume or silent spinners only when it suits a low volume section of the song. Now let's move on to the rules and guidelines for specific difficulties. For Kanton, the rules are: if a 1/2 pattern is used, the patterns must stay simplistic and be followed by a rest moment. Simplistic in this case means that the pattern doesn't change colors. It will be 2 blue notes or 2 red notes. And notes must be at least 1/2 of a beat apart. Now the guidelines for Kanton are: 1/1 patterns should not be longer than 7 notes. Main snappings should mostly consist of 2/1, 4/1s, or slower rhythms. There should be at least 1/2 distance between a slider and its preceding note. Slider velocity changes may be used cautiously. Try not to use too many SV changes. If you do, make sure they aren't drawing for newer players. Pretty self-explanatory so far. At least one rest moment that is 3/1 or longer should be inserted after 16:1 or to 20:1 of continuous mapping. This is why I explained continuous mapping to you. Moving on to Futsu. For Futsu, the rules are: if a 1/3 pattern is used, the patterns must stay simplistic and not use finisher notes. Notes must be at least 1/3 of a beat apart. Now the guidelines. 1/3 patterns should not be longer than 2 notes. 1/2 patterns should not be longer than 7 notes. Main snappings should mostly consist of 1/1, 2/1, or slower rhythms. Occasional 1/2 rhythm is acceptable. There should be at least 1/2 distance between a spinner and its preceding note. At least one rest moment that is 2/1 or longer should be inserted after 16:1 to 20:1 of continuous mapping. Now moving on to Muzukashi. The rules are: finishers must not be used in 1/4 patterns or faster. and notes must be 1/6 of a beat apart. Now the guidelines are 1/4 patterns should not be longer than 5 notes. Main snapping should mostly consist of 1/2, 1/1 or slower rhythms. Occasional 1/4 rhythm is acceptable. There should be at least 1/2 distance between a spinner and its preceding note. At least one rest moment that is 3/2 or longer should be inserted after 16:1 to 20:1 of continuous mapping. 1/4 patterns with one or more color changes should be used sparingly. Basically, try to stick to patterns that are just one color. Again, if the song is slower, you can actually get away with using more complex patterns. 1/4 patterns which are longer than 3 notes should consist of one color change at most, which should take place at the start or end of the pattern. Now we're moving on to Oni and the harder diffs. The rules are finisher notes must not be used in any 1/6 patterns or faster in this difficulty. Finisher notes for 1/4 patterns in this difficulty must only be used at the end of the pattern. Notes must be at least 1/8 of a beat apart. Now the guidelines, 1/8 patterns should not be longer than 2 notes. 1/4 patterns should not be longer than 9 notes. Main snapping should consist mostly of 1/2 and occasional 1/1 rhythms. Quarter rhythms may be used more frequently at this level of difficulty. There should be at least a quarter distance between a spinner and its preceding note. At least one rest moment, which is 1/1 or longer, should be inserted after 16:1 to 20:1 of continuous mapping. Quarter patterns which are longer than 5 notes should avoid complicated color changes. Now, inner Oni. Yeah, here's the thing. Here's a nice little fact about inner Oni. Yeah, there are no rules for inner Oni. I'm not joking. You can technically do anything, and it's rankable. Is it worthy of rank? That's a whole different topic, but there are guidelines for inner Oni. Main snapping should mostly consist of 1/2 and quarter rhythms. Quarter rhythms may be used very frequently at this level of difficulty. And there should be at least a quarter distance between a spinner and its preceding note. Now, HP and overall difficulty guidelines. I made this separately simply because I could just group them up, and because all the difficulties share similar HP and OD rating. I made a little table here for you guys. In my opinion, I think this is actually kind of outdated. I really don't see maps using HP and OD values like this anymore. I mean, there are some people that are even crazy enough to use HP 10 for everything. And that's it for the Taiko ranking criteria. It's pretty simple, and all the guidelines repeat, but with different snappings to fit each of the difficulties. I still recommend you read it to completely know the reasoning behind the rules and guidelines, as well as stuff that I've left out in this video. I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. I highly recommend you bookmark it, by the way, so you can look at it at any time you'd like. It will be your Bible as a mapper. And that's it for this video. As for the next video, it's actually going to be a pretty big one. It's not going to be exactly a guide on Taiko mapping, but it's going to be very much related, since the next video will be on the history of Taiko as a game mode. So I really am looking forward to this video. Anywho, see you guys.
Did you miss me?
Not really. He's tough.
Yeah, so what? Screw him.